Attention deficit disorder is normally associated as a childhood condition, but you say this is no longer the case. You yourself were diagnosed with ADD
Yes.
as a young adult, while
Yes,
you were in medical
I'm
school.
55 years old now. I was diagnosed in 1981, so I was, 30-something, in early 30s. I'd gone through college, medical school, residency. I was doing a fellowship in child psychiatry when I heard this condition, attention deficit disorder, described. I'd never heard of it until then. And I said, wow, there I am. And I went through the procedure, was diagnosed, yes, indeed, I have it. I really didn't need treatment at that point, but the insight, simply knowing that there was a name for this collection of symptoms that I had wrestled with for my whole life, was a tremendous relief.
Now, let me make sure I understand. I mean, the reason that it's so underdiagnosed in adulthood is because we've always suspected, because symptoms disappear in children around puberty,
Yes.
that was the end of it.
Yes.
But in fact, your research shows that about 2/3 of children carry those symptoms on into adulthood.
Yes, and in fact, the symptoms don't disappear during puberty. That's one of the myths that we used to believe, and I don't quite know where that came from. It is true that some kids get over it during puberty, but what happens more often is what happened to me. I learned to compensate so well that it looked as if I didn't have it any longer. But I was still wrestling with the condition, am to this very minute. And that happens to millions of adults. Now, for a good fraction of them, it's causing no problem, so no need to do anything. But for a hefty percentage, it is severely holding them back in life.
Well, in fact, you make a point in your book that in adulthood it kind of no longer looks like a disorder, and it almost becomes a trait, a personality character. How does it manifest itself? What are the symptoms of adult ADD?
Let me start with the positives, because people don't usually mention the positives, and the positives are abundant. Creativity, energy, intuition, the ability to think outside the box, a tendency to be a maverick, want to do it your way, independence, persistence, tenacity, often to the point of being stubborn. All of those qualities are really very positive and very useful in the world. However, they can get buried under the negatives. And the negatives, trouble getting organized, trouble staying focused, trouble staying on task, tendency to hop from topic to topic. Attention deficit is really misleading. It's not a deficit, it's a wandering, it's a vectoring.
So in fact, you can be very focused for some point.
Super focused, but maybe on the wrong thing. Or super focused on the right thing. You go into these states of tremendous focus. People say you don't have ADD, you can focus. That's not true at all. You can be amazingly focused.
When you talk about wandering, what happens? The mind all of a sudden switches to something else?
As if the TV channel were changed. You're somewhere else. And in the middle of a conversation. You'll be talking to someone, and then suddenly you realize you're just watching his lips move, and your mind is, at the ball game, or at the meeting you're going to go to next, or what you did last night, or what you're going to do tonight.
Now, you yourself have said that this is a very seductive diagnosis. That once you read about all the various symptoms, virtually anyone can say, "Oh, I see myself there." And as a consequence, some critics have said, this is just a made-up disorder. It's a function of a fast-paced life. Everyone loses concentration. What do you say to those cynics?
Well, first of all, I agree with them. You've got to be careful in making this diagnosis, and I would caution listeners, you'd have to be comatose not to identify with some of these symptoms. Living in the modern world, we all are like this some of the time. But to the person who say it doesn't exist, I'd simply tell them, first of all, there's an abundance of hard scientific evidence, brain scans, genetics, that show this is a real condition. If you are very distractible, if your mind is constantly shifting, and it is causing you to underachieve in your life, that's a disorder, and that's different from ordinary overwork, frenzy, multitasking modern life.
But lest any of our viewers think this is a trip to Hollywood having adult ADD. I mean, there are some scary statistics in your book. Is that about 25% of people who have adult attention deficit disorder also have bipolar problems of manic depression. 60% drug and alcohol addiction associated. Why is that? Why does ADD kind of come with these other disorders or afflictions?
Well, it's genetic, and I think the core issue is what I call the itch, the itch at the core of ADD, the itch that you can't scratch. in chemical terms, it's a relative depletion of dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter associated with pleasure.
Right.
And people with addictions, people with bipolar disorder, people with ADD, people with mood problems, all tend to have trouble generating pleasure at an ordinary level, so they resort to extraordinary means, whether it's becoming manic in the case of bipolar disorder, or abusing substances in the case of the addict, or in the case of ADD, seeking high stimulation, situations of extreme engagement to try to get the adrenaline pumping, which in turn leads to dopamine.
Right.
Substance abuse, violent behavior. The jails, for example, are full of people with undiagnosed ADD. Adaptive methods of scratching, find a creative outlet. When you hook yourself up to a creative outlet, David Neilman, JetBlue, starting an airline, me writing books, an entrepreneur starting a business. Those are creative outlets, and that is a marvelous way of harnessing the energy of ADD. On a more mundane level, physical exercise, tremendously helpful in treating ADD, of scratching the itch.
Because this, again, triggers the dopamine.
Exactly.
I want to come back to those first, but I mean, diagnosis is difficult,
yes,
is it not?
Yes.
Why?
Again, difficult in whose hands? Difficult in my hands? No. Difficult in the hands of a primary care physician? Yes.
So first, they're not qualified.
Exactly,
most doctors.
exactly, and nothing against them. I'm incompetent at diagnosing cancer, you know, so you do what you're good at. But in the hands of a specialist, it's not that hard. What people need to know is that there's not a proof-positive test for ADD. If we had that, then diagnosis would be easy. You just go get the brain scan.
So it's not like you know, diabetes. Or
exactly.
Okay.
Exactly, or a tumor where you can see it on a scan. We rely on the history, and so you have to take a very careful history, teasing out, you know, various factors. But if you do that, the diagnosis will emerge quite clearly, and in addition, you'll identify what else is going on. The positives, which I think you really need to bring front and center, as well as other conditions, as the ones you've mentioned. Bipolar may also be present. You may have a problem with substance abuse. You may have a problem with depression. You may have a problem with anxiety disorders. You may have an associated learning disability, as I do. I also have dyslexia. So you want to get a complete diagnosis that includes the identification of your talents and strengths, but also enumerates the coexisting conditions, so you can have a complete treatment plan.
There is some scanning technology.
Yes.
Is there quantitative electrocephalographm? I think that's
Yes,
one.
yes,
and
yes.
And what does this do? This looks at the brain waves and can
The
actually...
QEEG, for
Right.
short, is a variation on the EEG, the brain wave, that is a diagnostic tool. It's not proof positive. And then we have various scans. Most of them are still research tools. The MRI at the top of the list has shown us anatomical differences in certain regions of the brain in ADD. This has not become standardized to the point of it being a diagnostic test, but there's a statistical significance to these scans taken in aggregate, so we can say there's a difference in the ADD versus the non-ADD brain, but not able yet to use it as a diagnostic test. I think if we're ever going to get a proof-positive diagnostic test, it's going to come from this dopamine that I was talking about earlier, a test that measures dopamine receptors in the dopamine transporter molecule. And that may be the first real biological test we'll have for ADD as well as propensity toward addiction.
It's big business, $2 billion now. Pharmaceutical industry has got a vested interest in convincing people that they have ADD. In fact, some of the pharmaceutical companies now are giving people 6 questions to ask yourself, and if you answer positively for 4, rush to a doctor. I mean, what do you think of that?
Well, I think I have two ways of thinking about it. On the one hand, it's very good that we're educating the public. And as long as you do rush to the doctor and let the doctor be the gatekeeper, I think that's fine. If you rush to the pharmacy, in other words, if you rush to take the pill, then it's a big, big problem. And I think that's where you have to be careful. It's fine with me if drug companies promote this diagnosis and advertise and tell people about it, as long as the consumer goes to the doctor.
And the doctor's the gatekeeper.
And the doctor is an informed and educated gatekeeper. Unfortunately, often that doesn't happen. The consumer rushes to the doctor, and the doctor gives them a prescription, and they short-circuit the diagnosis, and the person ends up taking the wrong medication or thinking that medication alone is the treatment for this condition, and that's woefully inadequate. So it's a big problem.
the implications for treatment when
Yes.
you have ADD associated with other disorders,
Yes.
especially medical treatment. Does this
Yes.
complicate matters tremendously?
Oh, yes, but it's not insurmountable. I mean, if you go to see a specialist who knows what he or she is doing, these are very treatable conditions. And essentially, the treatment doesn't just bring you to even the playing field, it allows the assets to predominate. See, as I see it, the goal of treatment of ADD, as well as bipolar, as well as depression, is not just to eliminate the downside, but to capitalize on the upside. And that's the part that I think is new about my book and my approach. I'm saying it's not just a matter of taking care of what's wrong. It's looking for what's right and promoting it.
Can the treatment of things like bipolar actually make the ADD worse?
Sure. Depending upon how you go about doing it, if you mismanage the treatment,
Right.
You can make part of it better and part of it worse. And so there is a lot of skill involved in treating these conditions. But like flying an airplane, there's a lot of skill involved, but a lot of people can learn how to do it.
Sure.
So it's not impossible to learn how to do it.
Conversely, I guess, if you have no treatment, the prospect of succumbing to alcoholism, for example, becomes even that much greater. Because
Yes.
that desire, that itch, as you say, is there and is being unattended.
Absolutely. In the addicted population, there's a heavy predominance of people with undiagnosed ADD, bipolar disorder, and depression.
Not only hard to detect adult ADD, but I understand with children, especially preteens, 10 to 12, it's especially difficult. Why is that?
Well, in childhood, the symptoms of ADD are normal.
Right.
All kids are
Wild
distracted compulsive. Yeah, so how do you separate the normal boy from ADD? And the same thing even with girls. Now we realize that hyperactivity does not have to be part of this diagnosis.
Yeah, we always thought ADD was also a boy disease,
Exactly.
a boy disorder.
And we now know girls have it and women have it. And the reason we miss them is they weren't hyperactive at all.
Right.
They weren't overturning chairs and desks. They were sitting in the back of the room quietly daydreaming. And the teacher thought of them as slow or shy. But if you ask the girl, what's it like to be in the classroom? She says, oh, it's fine. I'm almost never there. She's got her own world. And the woman, the same thing. The woman, if you ask her, this woman who's been dismissed as a dingbat, or dismissed as spacey, or dismissed as not very bright, if you sit down and talk to her, she'll say, I have such trouble staying focused, and that's why I'm forgetful, and that's why I underachieve, and that's why, and she'll tear up and say, I know I'm smarter than everyone thinks I am.
Right.
And this is so poignant. But it's also so gratifying, because then I can give a diagnosis and offer a treatment plan, and this woman who has sold herself short, or the world has sold herself short, can suddenly achieve at the level that her brain really entitles her to achieve at.
Surprised to learn that this is a problem that could run in the family. Not that it was genetically based, but that within one family you could have, the entire group with ADD. I understand of your 3 children, 2 have ADD as well.
My 15-year-old Lucy has it. My middle child Jack has it, and our youngest Tucker, who's 9, doesn't have it, but he wishes he did, which is sort of shows you how we regard it in the family. My wife Sue doesn't have it, but she thinks it's contagious.
Now, the single most agonizing, I think, decision when someone discovers they or their children have ADD is to medicate or not to medicate. What's your position generally on this?
Well, sometimes people ask me, do you believe in Ritalin? And my response is, it's not a religious principle. This is a medication. If you use Ritalin or the other stimulants properly, it can be dramatically effective and very safe. What most people don't realize is that stimulant medication has been around since 1937. It was first used to treat this condition in 1937. So we have about 70 years of experience in prescribing stimulant medication. That's a lot of clinical experience.
Let me just interrupt there for 1 second, though. But having said that, my understanding is because most people were taken off medication once they reached the teens. So the notion of lifelong use of this still is still fairly murky. Is that right?
Correct. But what we have is a lot of experience with people taking it 3 to 5 years.
Right.
What we don't have is experience of people taking it 25 years. So you have to do the risk-benefit analysis.
Right.
What are the side effects of not taking the medication? And that's a question that people don't usually ask.
Right, of course.
But if you look at the kids who take it, and if you look at the adults who take it, who benefit from it, they won't give that up. You know, they were struggling beforehand.
Now,
and the benefit they get from it is as pronounced as the benefit someone who's nearsighted gets from wearing eyeglasses. So the side effects of not taking the medication in their cases is severe.
Now, you aren't on medication, your children are.
Well, I am on medication. Here it is.
But how do you determine, again, given the difficulty with some of the diagnosis, how do you determine who's going to benefit from medication and who really isn't?
Well, first of all, you take a careful history, you make a diagnosis. Then once you've made your diagnosis, the statistics are 80% of those who have ADD will benefit.
Are going to benefit.
Now, of those, a sizable fraction don't want to take any medication, and I am certainly one who honors that. And one of the reasons in my book I have many chapters devoted to non-medication treatments of ADD is because there is a lot of people who just don't want to take medication, and that's fine. I give them the medical facts about the safety of the medication and let them make their own decision. In my own children's case, they've benefited tremendously from medication, but they also received the non-medication treatments as well, and that comprehensive treatment program gives them it's the golden treatment. It's the best way to go.
What about the other side? I mean, there's reports that up to 50% of kids who are on Ritalin really don't have ADD, and that this is being used often just to kind of suppress normal rambunctiousness in children. It's kind of like a teacher's aid.
Yeah. Again, the data do not bear out.
They don't. Okay.
Not at all.
It's an urban legend, old wives' tale.
It's part of this, and again, I don't understand it, but it's part of this tremendous desire to denigrate these medications. No, I'm certainly not here to promote them. In my book,
but that's why we have you on the show.
I go to great length to talk about non-medication approaches, but for some reason there is just this tremendous amount of stuff written about how bad these meds are, when in fact the data support how useful they are. If you add up the number of prescriptions written for stimulant medication and measure it against the number of people who have ADD, you're not getting 50% more prescriptions than people who have ADD. So people just pull these figures out of thin air. Oh, 50% overprescribed. Where does that come from? How did you get your data, sir? Oh, I don't know. It's 50% though.
It was out there.
Yeah, it's out there. I've seen it.
Exactly.
And that is not to say it doesn't get overprescribed. It does. I know it does. I see people who are taking stimulant medication who shouldn't be taking it. And I think what's happening there is what I call pseudo-ADD. There are a lot of kids who don't have enough what I call connectedness in their lives. They don't have family dinner. They don't have adult supervision. They're watching too much TV, playing too many video games. You put kids in that kind of a soup, not enough human connectedness and supervision, too much stimulation with video, they'll look as if they have ADD. They'll be distractible, impulsive, and restless. To put them on medication is a grave mistake.
Right.
You're medicating something that should not be medicated. What those kids need is more human connectedness. What they need is more supervision. What they need is more time playing outside, having family dinner, getting a pet, spending time with grandma, turning off the television, turning off the video.
Well, let's talk about some of those things, because a big part of the book it deals with the non-medical treatment of ADD and how to bring out the talents of people who have ADD. One of the most important things you point out to is finding something you're good at.
Absolutely.
And mastering what that thing is you're good at and getting recognition for that mastery.
Absolutely.
This is part of your five-point program.
Yes.
Why is this important?
Well, what you build a lifetime on is developed talents and strengths, not remediated weaknesses. And I think we in the medical profession have made a big mistake when it comes to mental health in focusing in on what's going wrong instead of focusing in first on what might be made right. Because what you're going to build a lifetime on are talents and strengths that you develop, not weaknesses that you remediate. Now, I'm not saying don't remediate the weaknesses. Yes, you need to do that. But what I want us to start doing front and center, what are your, because a lot of these folks come in, adults come in and say, I don't think I'm really good at anything. And I don't really, not interested in it. So we have to go searching. But in everyone, you can find the hint of a talent, the flicker of an interest. And we need to identify that and then start to promote it. And as you promote that, as someone who, gee, you mean I can do this? You mean I might be good at this? I mean, this cooking interest I have, I could actually work in a restaurant?
But what benefit does that have?
Well, because as you get better at something, as you gain what I call mastery, self-esteem builds, confidence builds, and furthermore, motivation builds.
Right.
A lot of these, we tend to want to do more of what we're getting better at. Cuts both ways.
That helps with everyone. How does that help someone with ADD?
Oh, it helps absolutely with everyone. It's just that people with ADD tend not to be doing it because they tend to be frustrating. They tend to be underachieving. But yes, indeed, this is a plan for everybody. The 5 steps I outline in the book, are that connect, play, practice, mastery, recognition, and there's a whole chapter about that. That is a way of developing everyone's talents. Yes, indeed, and that's why I recommend it to everybody, managers in business, parents, teachers in school, coaches. If you want to bring out the best in someone, that's what you need to do. It's just that it's particularly relevant to the ADD population because notoriously they have not had the best brought out in them.
Right.
They've had the worst brought out in them.
You also write not just about the do's to help people with ADDs, but the don't. We've talked already about how exercise can be very, very helpful. But conversely, one of the worst things you say you can do, especially to a child, is give them a detention that takes away their play.
Yes.
What happens then?
Yeah. When you give a detention period to a child, it's like, what's an analogy? It's like giving a diabetic a candy bar. You're doing precisely the worst thing. What these kids need to do is not sit still. What they need to do is go out and run around.
Give them an errand as a task.
Absolutely. If you want to have a penalty, have them run laps or
Right.
go pick up the school grounds. But have physical exercise on a daily basis. These kids and grown-ups really need physical exercise, and when they get it, they tend to be focused. They tend to be calmer. When they don't get it, it's paradoxical. They tend to spill over. They tend to get very antsy and agitated. And the more you tell them to sit still, the more impossible it is for them to do it.
Shut off the TV and no video games for the day. Why?
Because, and I'm not saying don't give them any TV and video, but limit it because there's something about the interaction with TV and video, and we don't understand exactly what it is, that is unsettling. It leads the mind to states of instability, as well as low creativity. So these kids tend to get antsy, distracted, and not terribly interesting the more TV and video they consume. It's essentially intellectually empty. It's stimulating.
Yeah, because that's what you would think at first. You've got hand-eye coordination going on.
Big deal. Big deal. Hand-eye coordination. It is stimulating, but it is intellectually empty. Yeah, I mean, there's no ideas in it.
Diet, things like omega-3 fatty acids, very good.
Yeah, really important. And we've always known that food mattered, but we haven't known exactly what to prescribe. Right. And I have a chapter on what to. Some of it is obvious, like eat a balanced diet, try to stay away from additives. There's good evidence that junk food is bad for you in general, and particularly bad for ADD. And then a specific intervention. Eat a diet rich in antioxidants as well as take omega-3 fatty acid as a supplement. And the supplement I suggest is fish oil because it's very rich in
sardines, salmon.
Well, you have to eat an awful lot of sardines and salmon. I think you ought to get a bottle of fish oil.
A supplement.
Yeah, just like Grandma used to give us castor oil. She was on the right track. Now but make sure it's high-grade fish oil because if you don't get the top of the line, you might get contaminants like mercury and other heavy. Yeah.
What advice do you give to someone who has either a spouse or a child with ADD? What's the principal advice that you'd offer?
Learn about it. Learn about it, because as you learn about it, you'll learn how to manage it. Don't despair. Don't think of this as a curse.
Or a prison sentence or something.
At all. Think of it as a gift, but it's a gift that's difficult to unwrap. And what my book tries to do is help you unwrap it so the gift can emerge. Because it looks at first like a curse. It looks at first like, oh my gosh, this person just can't get their act together. This kid can't put his clothes on in the morning, can't get his homework organized, can't sit still at the table, can't go to a party without causing a problem. Can't go on vacation without being so disruptive. And this adult is just a chronic you know, loser. This adult just loses jobs and breaks up in relationships and drinks too much and gets into arguments, and what a waste of potential. He's got so much going for him and he never will make any use of it. So, okay, it looks like a curse, but I promise you, embedded in that, there is a gift. And if you learn how to take care of the downside, if you learn how to get focused, if you learn how to get organized, and in the case of adults, if you find ways of delegating and compensating and capitalizing on your strengths, the gift can be unwrapped. And,
Right.
and that is the whole point of my writing this book.
I've got a magic wand here. I can get rid of your ADD. Do you want me to use it or not?
Absolutely not. I wouldn't.
Honest
As God is my witness, I would not trade it for the world, nor would I trade it in my children.
Edward Hallowell, I want to thank you very much for joining me. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.